thank you for joining us as always. We appreciate it. The House of Representatives is coming into session. They've turned on the cameras, and they will be marching in as we speak. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you tomorrow on the Washington Journal.
The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., August 2nd, 2012. I hereby appoint the Honorable Steve Womack to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
The prayer will be offered by the guest chaplain, Imam Nayar Imam, Suffolk County Police Department, Yafank, New York.
We beseech God Almighty, calling upon him by the most noble of his characteristics. We bear witness and testimony that he is the sovereign, the omnipotent, the exalted, the all-knowing. God Almighty, we ask that you bestow upon all of our elected officials guidance and patience required to carry out the solemn task of legislation before them. Grant them commitment to serve before being served, a sense of fraternity before partisanship, the dedication to the interest of our country before the interest of even their own selves. The final prophet of God, Muhammad, peace be upon him, stated that the leader of people are a representation of their deeds. We ask God Almighty that he make our elected officials true representatives of honesty, equality, and the values that represent the uniqueness of our nation. We ask you, Almighty God, that you look to us with glance of mercy, regardless of gender, ethnicity, religion, or political party. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance this morning will be led by the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Whitman.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 5 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my...
Without objection, gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, after today, Congress completes its business till September without finishing critical items, leaving many sectors across this country uncertain about their fiscal future. Looming defense cuts or sequestration still hang over the Congress as unfinished business. I'm extremely disappointed Congress is leaving town without addressing such pressing issues and with so little time scheduled in the rest of this legislative year. Many Americans in America's 1st District are frustrated with Washington's lack of action and accomplishments as this country struggles to rebound from these tough economic times. Virginians and all Americans have the right to be upset with such irresponsible procrastination. Sequestration threatens our country's national security and sends the wrong message to the American people and to the world about our commitment to defend this great nation in the future. Congress should stay in Washington to finish the business of the people. I am prepared to stay in Washington as long as it takes. These issues are too important to wait. Mr. Speaker, with that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Pennsylvania seek recognition? Does the gentlelady seek unanimous consent? Does the gentlelady seek unanimous consent? Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
To strengthen our economic competitiveness in a global economy, we must create the right environment for private sector growth in cutting-edge industries. As we work to reform our corporate tax code, it's critical that we consider policies that reflect our 21st century economy, our innovation economy, and promote new domestic manufacturing based on the best ideas developed right here in America. Today, I will introduce a plan to incentivize manufacturing, innovation, and research and development right here in the United States. The Innovation Promotion Act keeps American businesses competitive by reducing their tax rate on patented products by more than a half to 10%. This lower tax rate is a major incentive to keep production here in the United States and will better ensure American companies that choose to stay in the U.S. can compete with foreign competitors, expand to new markets, and hire new workers. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting American entrepreneurship, American innovation, and American jobs. Sign on to the Innovation Promotion Act to build America's economic leadership in the world and promote job creation right here at home.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Traditionally, members of Congress return to their districts during the month of August to avoid the hottest, muggiest month of the Washington year. But given our current circumstances and the invention of air conditioning, I think we should break that tradition. Senate Democrats have passed the President's plan to raise taxes. A family of 4 earning $50,000 a year will see their taxes increased by more than $2,000 per year. House Republicans have passed the only plan in Washington to stop the tax hike in its entirety. A new report finds the tax hike will cost more than 700,000 American jobs. I stand by the House leadership who stated this week that if the Senate takes action to address these threats, the House will be in Washington in August for the purpose of sending solutions to the President's desk. We have a job to do, and 23 million unemployed Americans are waiting. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition? Without objection, gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to call attention to the need for stronger gun safety laws in our country. This Congress has not only failed to address the issue of gun violence in the United States, it has actually weakened gun safety laws. I am proud that my home state of Massachusetts is a leader in gun violence prevention and has the lowest firearm fatality rate per 100,000 population of any urban industrialized state. I am proud of the work being done by anti-gun violence advocates across the Commonwealth, including Boston's Mayor Tom Menino and John Rosenthal, founder of the organization Stop Handgun Violence. Today, Stop Handgun Violence is hosting a rally in Boston calling on Congress to pass stronger gun safety legislation. I applaud their work and the efforts of other organizations like the Brady Campaign as they continue to educate and advocate for sensible legislation. What more will it take for this Congress to bring common-sense gun control measures to the floor? How many more tragedies? Silence is no longer acceptable. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Mississippi is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm a CPA by trade. I've spent many years of my former life wading through volumes of tax code, trying to assure my clients follow every last letter of the law, while also trying to assure they don't get stuck paying more taxes than they owe. But the American people and the people of South Mississippi don't need a CPA to tell them that we need a simpler, fair, and flatter tax code. Last week, the U.S. Senate sent a strong message when it voted to raise taxes on small businesses and families. In South Mississippi alone, the proposed tax hikes would increase taxes by an average of $2,200 per family. That's a total of more than $723 million more that South Mississippians would have to pay. In addition to the extra tax burden, a recent study from Ernst & Young shows that we could lose as many as 710,000 jobs, and wages could decrease by almost 2%. Now, I'm no rocket scientist, but I'm pretty sure the American people and the people of South Mississippi don't need a rocket scientist to tell them that these tax hikes are the last thing we need right now. That's why the House stepped forward yesterday and passed legislation to stop the tax hike. And that's why we're committed to continue working on tax reform to make our tax code simpler, fair, flatter for all Americans. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia? Without objection, gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to pay my respects to a tireless crusader in the quest to protect America's children from violence and exploitation. Ernie Allen recently retired as the President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, where his mission was to protect our nation's children. Under Ernie's leadership, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children played a crucial role in recovering some 74,000 children. With Ernie at the helm, they saw their recovery rate for missing children climb from 62% in 1990 to 94% today. While there's no official record book for what Ernie's accomplished over the years, his record lives on in the lives he has saved and the families he's reunited. I know I speak for my colleagues in the Congressional Missing, Exploited, and Runaway Children's Caucus and for thousands of grateful families all across the nation in thanking Ernie Allen for a job well done. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, our economic problems are imminently solvable. They just require confidence in the American people. But the American people have lost confidence in Congress, and it's easy to see why. Exhibit A, the inability to reach a deal on a grand bargain on debt reduction. Last year, the Speaker and the President negotiated a plan to reduce the debt by $4 trillion through a mix of spending cuts and revenue increases. Revenues that would come not from raising taxes, but closing special deals, institutionalized corruption. That plan represented a balanced and bipartisan approach. The economy today would be performing much better had that deal been enacted. But the Tea Party-controlled Republican House rejected the deal. Exhibit B, the refusal to act boldly to create jobs and rebuild the infrastructure of America. We just spent $89 billion rebuilding the roads of Afghanistan. Last week, we passed a bill to spend just $52 billion a year in rebuilding roads and bridges right here in America. That's a weak plan. In fact, it's pathetically weak. That is why the American people have lost confidence in Congress. The best tax policy is to invest in America and the American people and to bring lost taxpayers back to work. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition? Does the gentlelady seek unanimous consent? Yes. Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, Obama cares, and you should too. Obamacare provides access to much-needed contraceptives for women. First of all, it's my body, not yours. I alone bear the burden, pain, and joy that it brings. Please stop trying to regulate my reproductive organs. They belong to me. Have you ever had a menstrual period? Have you ever felt unbearable pain in every bone of your body during childbirth? Will you be there for a mother when she needs prenatal care, formula, diapers? Will you support the Head Start program? Will you focus on creating good public schools again? Will you perform foster care and stop greasing the prison pipeline with unwanted children? There are grandmothers living in trailer parks and public housing, single-handedly raising millions of grandchildren. Where are you when grandmother is trying to feed Jerome, Shakita, Pedro, Heather, and John? The only time I see you is on the floor of the House trying to take away Grandma's Social Security and attacking her Medicare and food stamps. Grandma doesn't have a car, so she has no ID, so she can't vote. For some reason, you care about a baby right up until the minute it is born to the world, and then you disappear and desert the children you claim to protect and love. Shame on you. Stop the cradle-to-grave neglect and abuse.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Let's create jobs, jobs, jobs for the American people. Obama cares, and so should you.
Gentlelady's time has expired. May I remind members to heed the gavel. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I call a privilege resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 755 in the matter of Representative Laura Richardson of California. Resolved that the House adopted the report of the Committee on Ethics dated August 1, 2012 in the matter of Representative Laura Richardson.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, I yield an equal amount of time in this debate to a lady with whom I'm honored to serve, the gentlewoman from California, Mrs. Sanchez, the ranking member on the Committee on Ethics, for purposes of debate only, and I ask unanimous consent that she be permitted to control that time.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consent.
Gentleman is recognized.
As chairman of the Committee on Ethics, I rise in support of a resolution before us today which calls for a reprimand for Representative Laura Richardson of California. Article 1 of the Constitution gives Congress the responsibility for punishing members of our body for disorderly behavior. And in the House, it is the Committee on Ethics, the only evenly divided committee made up of 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans, and served by a completely nonpartisan professional staff that has been entrusted with the responsibility to enforce the rules of the House and recommend actions, such as that before us today, when a member or staff acts in a manner that violates the spirit of public trust. The obligation, therefore, falls to this committee to review those allegations that a member has violated the ethical standards that the American people expect and deserve from those of us who are privileged enough to work for them, men and women who wear the title of representative of this great nation. This unfortunate story begins in October of 2010, when the committee during the 111th Congress first began to receive complaints from several members of Representative Richardson's staff, both from the Washington, D.C. and Long Beach, California offices, that Representative Richardson required her staff to perform campaign work. The committee began an initial inquiry based on these complaints, as well as from media reports consistent with those complaints. On November 3rd, 2011, the committee, now in the 112th Congress, impaneled an investigative subcommittee appointed Representative Charles Dent of Pennsylvania and Representative John Yarmouth of Kentucky to lead this bipartisan subcommittee in reviewing the allegations against Representative Richardson. Joining Mr. Dent and Mr. Yarmouth with 2 members pulled from a pool of members who assist the committee when needed. In this case, they are Representative Rob Bishop of Utah and Representative Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico. These 4 members, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, served on the investigative subcommittee and over the past 9 months led an extensive investigation supported by the committee's dedicated, nonpartisan professional staff, delving deep into this matter. In a minute, Mr. Dent, who served as chairman of the investigative subcommittee, will detail the volume of work that the investigative team undertook during this period. Ultimately, the subcommittee unanimously agreed to a statement of alleged violation against Representative Richardson. Mr. Speaker, while the full committee report, the investigative subcommittee report, Representative Richardson's responsive views, and all exhibits were filed by the ranking member and me yesterday morning and have been available to the House and to the American people since that time, here now, in summary, are the 7 counts of violation. First, Representative Richardson violated the Purpose Law, Title 31, Section 1301, United States Code, by using official resources of the House for campaign, political, personal, and other non-official purposes. Second, Representative Richardson violated House Rule 23 by retaining a full-time employee in her district office who did not perform duties commensurate with their compensation. Third, Representative Richardson violated House Rule 23 by behaving in a manner that did not reflect credibly upon this House when she unlawfully used House resources for non-official purposes. Fourth, Representative Richardson violated House Rule 23 by behaving in a manner that did not reflect credibly upon the House when she improperly compelled members of her official staff to do campaign work by threatening, attempting to intimidate, directing, or otherwise pressuring them to do such work. Fifth, Representative Richardson violated House Rule 23 by behaving in a manner that did not reflect credibly upon the House when she obstructed and attempted to obstruct the investigation of this committee into these allegations. Sixth, Representative Richardson violated Clause 2 of the Code of Ethics for Government Service by failing to uphold the laws and legal regulations discussed above and being a party to their evasion. Seventh, Representative Richardson violated House Rule 23 by failing to abide by the letter and spirit of House and committee rules. Mr. Speaker, the record should note that any time a member is confronted with a statement of alleged violation, he or she has the option of challenging those allegations with a public hearing of an adjudicatory subcommittee, or, in the case of Representative Richardson, negotiating a resolution with the investigative subcommittee. In this instance, Representative Richardson negotiated a resolution in which she admitted to all 7 counts in the statement of alleged violation and has waived her rights to any additional process in this matter, including waiving her right to an adjudicatory hearing. Representative Richardson has also agreed to accept a reprimand by the House, as well as a $10,000 fine to be paid out of personal funds to the U.S. Treasury no later than December 1st, 2012. In the history of our country, 5 members have been expelled from Congress, 23 members have been censured, and 8 members have been reprimanded. Representative Richardson negotiated, and we recommend the sanction of reprimand. The investigative subcommittee unanimously adopted a report recommending a resolution including these terms to the full committee. And on July 31st, 2012, the full committee adopted the resolution, the recommendations of the subcommittee. Mr. Speaker, at this time I am pleased to yield to the distinguished ranking member of the Ethics Committee, Mrs. Sanchez, for any comments she may have.
The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlelady is recognized.
I want to thank the chairman for his work in this matter, and he has addressed in his opening comments some important aspects of this particular matter. Representative Charles Dent and John Yarmouth, who led the investigative subcommittee, will speak in greater detail about the facts of this matter and how and why the committee reached the recommendation of sanction that comes before the House today. I would like to briefly remind our colleagues why we are discussing this matter on the floor today and the importance of the ethics process to the integrity of the House. As noted before, the Ethics Committee is unique in that its membership is evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. In that bipartisan spirit, I would like to cite the observations of 2 former chairmen of this committee about the role of the Ethics Committee and the role that it has in overseeing the House. A former Republican chairman of the committee once said that the ethics process is not a trial. Instead, it is a peer review process. In that same vein, a former Democratic chair of the committee said, "The purpose of the ethics process is not punishment, but accountability and credibility. Accountability for the respondent and credibility for the House itself." The committee followed these important principles in assessing the conduct of our colleague, Representative Laura Richardson. The recommendation for sanction we present to you today will ensure that Representative Richardson is held accountable for her conduct. It will also reaffirm the credibility of the House by demonstrating our commitment to upholding and enforcing the ethics standards that apply to all of us equally. How the committee conducted the investigation in this matter reinforces the goals of accountability and credibility. This matter was begun by the committee at its own initiative in the last Congress. The members of the subcommittee did not prejudge the outcome of this matter, nor did the members of the full committee. Out of fairness to all House members and staff, it is important to point out that the mere fact that an individual is the subject of an investigation doesn't mean that a violation has actually occurred. The existence of an investigation doesn't reflect a judgment by the committee on the allegations. This is true whether the investigation has been publicly acknowledged by the committee or whether it remains confidential. The committee conducted a thorough and fair investigation. Representative Richardson was represented by counsel throughout the committee's investigation. She was provided with copies of materials gathered by the subcommittee. Representative Richardson also chose to waive certain procedural rights and steps in the investigative process that were available to her. The subcommittee listened to her views and interpretations of the facts of the investigation, as well as appropriate sanctions. The full committee also took into account her views. Ultimately, a dozen members of the House of both parties weighed the allegations regarding Representative Richardson and, based on the facts, concluded that her conduct did not meet the ethical standards that apply to all of us in a number of respects. The conclusion was bipartisan and it was unanimous. The misconduct in this matter was serious, and in accordance with the House precedent, it merits the serious sanction of reprimand. Representative Richardson has agreed to accept the sanction of reprimand for her conduct. Usually, it is the committee's work in investigative matters like this one that receives public attention. But the committee's nonpartisan staff provides advice and education to members and staff every day. The report issued by the committee in this matter serves both purposes. If you have not already taken the opportunity to do so, I urge my colleagues and House staff to carefully read the committee's report. As the report says, the boundaries between our official, political, and personal roles are sometimes clear, and sometimes they are complicated. This matter illustrates the consequences of failing to heed those boundaries. Finally, I wish to acknowledge and thank my colleagues, Representative Charlie Dent and John Yarmuth, Rob Bishop, and Ben Ray Lujan for their hard work on the investigative subcommittee. In addition, I want to thank all of our committee staff. Although we are a bipartisan committee, we have a professional, nonpartisan staff. All of the members of the committee appreciate their continuing hard work and service to the House. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves her time. Gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Speaker, I'm now pleased to recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Dent, who ably served as chairman of the investigative subcommittee, for any comments he may have.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the gentleman from Alabama and the gentlelady from California for the leadership of the committee. As a member of the Committee on Ethics and as chairman of the investigative subcommittee, or ISC, in this matter, I do rise in support of the resolution which calls for the adoption of this committee's report and will serve as a reprimand of Representative Laura Richardson for her conduct and will impose upon her a $10,000 fine. I do not relish speaking under these circumstances. This is indeed a solemn moment when the House must consider punishing one of its own members. As the chairman stated, over the last 9 months, as members of the investigative subcommittee, my colleagues, Mr. Yarmuth from Kentucky, Mr. Bishop of Utah, and Mr. Lujan of New Mexico, and I conducted an extensive investigation into the allegations regarding Representative Laura Richardson. The subcommittee met on over 20 occasions. In total, the ISC and staff conducted 12 interviews during this phase of the inquiry and reviewed the transcripts of 17 interviews conducted during the committee's earlier phase of its inquiry. The subcommittee also reviewed thousands of pages of documents. I appreciated the hard work of each of the subcommittee members, especially the ranking member, Mr. Yarmuth of Kentucky. It was a pleasure to work with. I'd also like to thank the nonpartisan professional staff of the Ethics Committee who conducted the investigation with dignity and professionalism at all times. Deborah Mayer, Cliff Stoddard, Sharia Clark, Chris Tate, and Brittany Boren. At the conclusion of a thorough investigation, the subcommittee unanimously concluded that there was substantial reason to believe that Representative Richardson had violated the Code of Conduct and other laws, rules, and standards of conduct. The chairman outlined the 7 counts in the statement of alleged violations, which was unanimously adopted by the investigative subcommittee. Here's a summary of the findings of the report and why the committee recommends that Representative Richardson be reprimanded by the House for her conduct. As discussed fully in the investigative subcommittee report, fundamentally, Representative Richardson failed to acknowledge the boundaries between the official and political realms. On page 59 of the ISC report, it reads in part, quote, "This case is about boundaries. The House entrusts members with a great deal of discretion over a large amount of taxpayer resources. This constructive trust requires members to delineate between the official, the political, and the personal in ways that are at times quite tidy and at others tangled. Representative Richardson did not acknowledge these boundaries. She acted to consume the resources endowed to her as a member for whatever purpose suited her whims at the moment, be they official acts, her re-election, or her personal needs. The ISC discovered significant evidence suggesting that her wrongdoing continued even after learning the committee was investigating her. If the committee fails to exact a steep price for such conduct, the message is one of a set of rules with a toothless enforcement mechanism. And I close quote. Representative Richardson's misconduct included, first, she improperly compelled or coerced members of her staff to do campaign work. Representative Richardson required the staff of her district office in Long Beach, California, to perform campaign work each weeknight from approximately 6:30 p.m. through 9 p.m. during at least the 2 months prior to the 2010 primary and general elections. This practice alone accounted for hundreds of hours of conscripted campaign work by public servants who did not wish to perform it and may not be forced to do so. She also required the district staff to perform additional campaign work on the weekends. Representative Richardson applied the same philosophy to her Capitol Hill staff. This demonstrates a blatant disregard for the boundaries between official events and campaign events. Second, Representative Richardson used official resources of the House for campaign and non-official purposes. While the report has a detailed exposition of many of the resources used by Representative Richardson, some of the more significant improper uses of resources included the use of staff time during the official workday to conduct campaign activities, repeated use of the House email system to conduct campaign business, use of the MRA to lease a car, which she parked at her house and used as her only mode of transportation in the district, regardless as to whether her destination was official, campaign, or personal in nature. Third, Representative Richardson paid her deputy district director as a full-time House employee, but for months before the 2010 elections, she directed this employee to conduct campaign work for a significant portion of each day. Additionally, in 2011, nearly a year after Representative Richardson received notice of the committee's investigation into misuse of House resources, Representative Richardson hired a new district director who, with Representative Richardson's knowledge and approval, spent much of his time performing campaign work. Taken together, a theme emerges. Representative Richardson used her staff as she saw fit. The evidence does not demonstrate isolated incidences of compelled campaign work. If that were in fact the case, we would not likely be here today. It demonstrates a constant effort by Representative Richardson to direct and pressure her official employees to perform as much campaign work as possible, regardless of whether or not they wanted to volunteer. The environment Representative Richardson cultivated in her office was so poor that one of her employees, a detailee from the Wounded Warriors program, wrote in her letter of resignation, quote, as a service-connected disabled veteran, it is sad to say that I would rather be at war in Afghanistan than work under people that are morally corrupt, close quote. Just as concerning as the substantive violations, if not more so, was the significant evidence that Representative Richardson obstructed and attempted to obstruct the investigation. To fulfill our constitutional duties, the House must take action against any member who improperly attempts to frustrate a committee investigation. The investigative subcommittee concluded that Representative Richardson obstructed and attempted to obstruct the investigation into these allegations. Specifically, Representative Richardson directed her staff to testify that their campaign work had been voluntary, even in cases where staff had not volunteered. She also attempted to obstruct the committee's investigation by altering or destroying evidence. And finally, Representative Richardson obstructed the investigation by failing to provide materials responsive to a subpoena issued by the investigative subcommittee. The investigative subcommittee served Representative Richardson with that subpoena only after months had passed, with Representative Richardson ignoring numerous requests from the ISC that she provide responsive documents. Even then, the investigative subcommittee discovered documents that Representative Richardson had in her possession, custody, or control, and nevertheless failed to produce. Based on these conclusions, the investigative subcommittee found that Representative Richardson committed 7 different violations of the Code of Official Conduct or other laws, rules, or standards of conduct. Throughout this process, Representative Richardson has been afforded every opportunity to defend herself, Ultimately, she initiated a negotiated resolution and admitted to the 7 counts in the statement of alleged violation. She received a copy of the investigative subcommittee report 5 days prior to its adoption and was given an opportunity to provide her views to be considered by the committee. Through her misconduct, Representative Laura Richardson has violated the public trust. While no member wants to sit in judgment of a colleague, it is our duty to protect the integrity of the House. Accordingly, on behalf of the committee, Mr. Speaker, I recommend that the House adopt the committee's unanimous report and that the report serve as a reprimand of Representative Laura Richardson for her misconduct. I yield back.
Gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I yield to the gentleman from Kentucky, a member of the Ethics Committee, for such time as he may consume.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I thank the gentlewoman from California for yielding. As a member of the Committee on Ethics and as the ranking member of the investigative subcommittee in this matter, I rise in support of the resolution that calls for the adoption of this committee's report and will serve as a reprimand of Representative Richardson for her conduct and will impose upon her a $10,000 fine. After the investigative subcommittee unanimously concluded that there was substantial reason to believe that Representative Richardson had committed these violations, Representative Richardson initiated formal discussions regarding a negotiated resolution of her matter, which would avoid an adjudicatory hearing. The investigative subcommittee engaged Representative Richardson in good faith during these discussions, delaying its vote on a statement of alleged violation by more than a week to continue negotiating. On July 18, 2012, Representative Richardson agreed to the terms of a negotiated resolution with the investigative subcommittee. As a part of that resolution, Representative Richardson has admitted to the 7 counts in the statement of alleged violation. There is no longer a factual dispute regarding whether these violations have been proven. On July 26, 2012, the investigative subcommittee unanimously adopted its report and transmitted it to the full committee. Representative Richardson was provided a copy of the report, and pursuant to the terms of the negotiated resolution, she was given 5 days to submit her views. On July 25, 2012, Representative Richardson submitted her views on the report in writing. Those views were transmitted along with the investigative subcommittee report and considered by the full committee. As noted in the committee's report, the members were not persuaded by Representative Richardson's submission. Some of the terms in the negotiated resolution require action only by the Ethics Committee or Representative Richardson. But there are terms that have been brought before the House today, Mr. Speaker, and that is the need for the House to impose the punishment that all parties agree is an acceptable sanction for Representative Richardson's misconduct, a reprimand by the House of Representatives, and the imposition of a $10,000 fine. It is important for all members to understand that it is our responsibility to ensure that if our staffs wish to work on our campaigns, they must do it on their own time, outside of their office, and without the use of any official resources. A staffer is free to volunteer, but a member cannot compel them to do so. Mr. Speaker, it became clear during the investigation that Representative Richardson did not believe that she was compelling her official staff to work on her campaign. It was equally clear, after hearing from members of her staff, that they believed they were being compelled to do so. There are examples of Representative Richardson providing explicit directions to her staff to work on her campaign. There are more numerous examples when Representative Richardson's actions would lead any reasonable staffer to believe that they were required to do campaign work or face retribution. The way members treat and manage their staffs is often as important and significant an influence on employee understanding and actions as any words a member may use. Ultimately, it is also the member's responsibility to know and manage what is being asked of their staff and what isn't. As this case shows, when these rules are broken, members are not only responsible, they will be held accountable. Mr. Speaker, I once again support the approval of the Ethics Committee report and the sanctions imposed on Ms. Richardson, and I yield back.
Gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I would like to yield to the gentleman from Missouri, the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Missouri is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The committee has examined the case and reached a conclusion. The subject of the investigation has agreed to accept responsibility and, in fact, has affixed her name to the findings as a confirmation of such. And as a supporter and colleague of the subject of the investigation, I know that she regrets the violations and hopes that the reprimand by the House will allow both her and the House to move on to address the great issues facing the nation. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from California.
I'd like to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves her time. Gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Speaker, I am prepared to close unless there are any other speakers that seek recognition.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, I'm requesting time to speak.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy on the part of the committee to yield 5 minutes to Representative Richardson.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the ranking member for yielding time, and it's my understanding I'd be provided additional time if needed. I had no desire or intent to prolong the debate on this report, but given what has now been stated during this debate, which is contrary to what I understood to be agreed to, I want to make sure that my colleagues are aware of several issues critical to understanding the full context of this resolution. First, I want to assure my colleagues that contrary to the inflammatory suggestions in the full committee report, I do take these findings very seriously and do accept the responsibility for the specific conduct set out in the statement of alleged violations. Second, I set forth in my statement of views, including in the committee report, several significant concerns about the manner in which the committee conducted this investigation. I find it was interesting that the ranking member stated in the initial discussion that the subject of an investigation does not mean that an individual or a violation has occurred. Well, in fact, in this investigation, there are 7 areas where I feel that there has been a violation. Prejudgment and improper influence of witnesses by the Ethics Committee, the very matter that the ranking member just mentioned. And I'll state for the record what specifically was stated in those statement of views. During the Rule 18a inquiry at the outset of the committee's process, the committee counsel improperly influenced witnesses by telling them a year before any such decision had been made by the Ethics Committee that the Ethics Committee was likely to impanel an investigative subcommittee, thereby clearly signaling that the Ethics Committee staff at least already believed that I, Representative Richardson, was guilty of misconduct, and given the staff discussions clearly influenced subsequent staff testimony. For example, during their interview of Angel Macias, a key staff witness, Ethics Counsel told Ms. Macias it's completely up to the full committee on what they want to do. They make the final decision, which could be anything from dismiss the matter entirely to investigate it by impaneling an investigative subcommittee. The counsel continued, if that happens, you will be called, you will be placed under oath, so that is the process. Chances are, this is important, chances are they are going to want to impanel. This is according to Macias's transcript on number 34. Committee counsel told former District Director Eric Boyd during his first interview that the chances are very likely that you're going to be interviewed again. If you are interviewed again, it will be under oath and it will be in front of members of the committee. My recommendations could be anywhere from dismiss the matter as being, you know, not a violation or impanel an investigative subcommittee, or I think you probably know which way at this point we're looking. Eric Boyd's transcript, page 83 and 84. Committee counsel told district staffer Candace Yamagawa, the committee's choices in this matter are to dismiss the matter because the information received lacks merit or lacks sufficient information to believe a violation occurred, or we recommend that an investigative subcommittee be impaneled. You actually won't hear back from us until such time we decide to interview you again. And the reason is that, as I said, everything is done confidentially. I expect that we would not be able to impanel an investigative subcommittee until the beginning of the 112th Congress because there's insufficient time left in this Congress to do so. So more than likely it would be January we would impanel, doing anything by doing any additional work. And then finally the committee counsel told Kenneth Miller during his first Rule 18a interview on November 2010 that when I present the findings to the member, I will be giving them a full briefing on what I believe was violated, be it House rules, campaign law, or federal criminal statutes. Miller testimony, page 47. During these interviews with my staff, the committee attorneys made clear to staff witnesses that the Ethics Committee staff had already determined that I had committed violations at the very first stages of the preliminary inquiry. Committee staff explicitly requested that my staff not speak with my own counsel, a recognized form of prosecutorial misconduct, which effectively deprived me of opportunity to actually learn of the specific allegations against me until the final stages of this investigation. And after the resolution had been negotiated, new and additional allegations appeared in the investigative subcommittee report, supported by attorney proofers that I still, to this date, have never seen. The full committee report takes issues with my raising these concerns, stating that the resolution of the matter that I waived all my procedural rights and that the time lodging for these objections have passed. These concerns should be taken seriously by the committee as I brought them forward. Third, but most importantly, I request additional time.
Mr. Speaker, I would inquire of the gentlelady from California how much additional time does she intend to seek, because as I have heard her comments, respectfully, it sounds like those were all contained in her response, which was included in the report submitted to the House. So I would ask, how much additional time would you be seeking to conclude your comments?
Well, I was told that I would be allowed to continue to request additional time to complete my presentation. I would say approximately, I think, less than 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I will grant the gentlelady five additional minutes.
The gentlelady is recognized for an additional 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The purpose of me standing today, and I had no intentions of speaking, because I believe we had agreed to a certain format of what would have occurred. But the most important issue that I bring forward is the comments of Mr. Dent. Third, with respect to the count of charging obstruction of the committee investigation, I want to make clear that the statement of alleged violations does not assert anywhere that I deliberately failed to produce documents in response to requests for information and a subpoena as referenced in yesterday's public statement by the chair and the ranking member. I did not admit to this conduct, and I certainly do deny it, and it's my understanding that the committee is aware that, in fact, it was not included. With respect to the conduct to which I did admit, my statement of views explains that my office calendars were adjusted retroactively, but only to accurately reflect the history of the time worked by my deputy district director. Discussions about that adjustment, in fact, took place before the committee commenced its inquiry. I did, at the very beginning of the committee's preliminary inquiry, suggest, and Mr. Chairman, I think this is very important, I acknowledge the statement of alleged violations, in fact, much of which has been said today has been in fact true. But what I want to make emphatically clear, and what I want to emphasize, that I've never taken or threatened any action against any staffer who did not volunteer to work on my campaign. There is no doubt that a number of staff felt compelled or coerced to do so. That was not my intent, and I deeply regret that this occurred. And so I want to make sure very clear to the committee, I'll repeat that statement. There is no doubt that a number of staff felt compelled or coerced to do so, and that was not my intent, and I deeply do regret that this occurred. I never told any staff member that they would be out of a job if they did not work on the campaign, and it is undisputed that I was not present at the staff meeting at which the time the statement was made. With that context and these clarifications, Mr. Speaker, I respectfully ask that my colleagues would refer, as was stated by the committee, that they would refer to my public reference to this matter, my statement of views, which are included in the report. As I conclude, Mr. Chairman and the ranking member, I look forward to the resolution of this matter. In fact, I've sought the resolution of this matter for well over a year, and I have agreed to the items that were set forward. However, some of the details that were set in the language that was said today was not what had been discussed. And so for the record, I wanted to clarify that. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady may not reserve her time. The time is controlled by the gentleman from Alabama. Gentlelady from California.
Mr. Speaker, I yield such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just feel it's important to point out several important issues that were raised by Ms. Richardson in her comments on the floor today. Much of what she has stated on the floor today were included in the views that she filed after reviewing the report that was issued. She raised these points in her views of the report, and I feel compelled to add that the committee took those views very seriously, and they responded and refuted those points in its response to her views, which is all included in the report, which has been made publicly available. Nothing that has been stated on the floor today by any member, but most especially Mr. Dent, are statements that are already included in the report to which Representative Richardson has responded. And again, many of the points that she raised, we investigated, took very seriously, and included in our response to those views. So I don't think that there's anything further to add other than she has been given an opportunity to voice her concerns at every step of the process, and we have scrupulously adhered to a process to try to take her views and her suggestions into account, and we have arrived at the report which is unanimously agreed on by all of the committee members. And with that, I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady's time is reserved. Gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Speaker, I'm prepared to close. If the gentlelady, the ranking member, has no further speakers.
I have no further speakers.
Does the gentlelady yield back?
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. Gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Speaker, in closing, I want to once again thank members of the committee as well as members of the pool for their tremendous service that they render to this institution. And on behalf of the entire House, I want to again thank the nonpartisan professional committee staff for their extraordinary hard work and commitment to the House of Representatives and to the American people that we all serve. As is often noted on the floor, especially during somber moments like this, public office is a public trust. And for the vast majority of members who have been honored with the opportunity, the privilege to serve in this, the People's House, there is an unspoken duty to hold ourselves up to a higher standard. Unfortunately, as Representative Richardson has admitted, she did not live up to that higher standard. And as such, she did a disservice to her staff, to her colleagues. And while it is ultimately up to her constituents in California to be the final judge of her actions, I think it's safe to say she did a disservice to the hardworking taxpayers from all corners of this country who expect and deserve more from their elected leaders. Throughout the course of this matter, the investigative subcommittee heard desperate, sometimes emotional pleas for help from members of Representative Richardson's staff. Representative Dent has shared at least one of the stories with the body today. And even since word first broke yesterday of this resolution this morning, the committee has received calls from other staffers thanking us for bringing this matter to a public resolution. As a former Hill staffer myself, I have great respect for those staffers who are willing to come to the Ethics Committee with their stories and heartfelt concerns. That is not an easy thing to do against a member of Congress, particularly when that person claims to be your boss and you're made to feel that your job is in jeopardy. At the end of the day, however, we must remember and never forget that the real employer for us all are the American people. I was particularly moved by one of Representative Richardson's former staffers who testified, and I quote, "This certainly should not be an example as to the way an elected official of this country should conduct themselves under any circumstance." And, Mr. Speaker, I am simply haunted by the statement of another staffer that Mr. Dent referenced, a lady who was part of the Wounded Warrior Program, someone who was willing to risk her life in service to her country and ended up coming home a disabled veteran. She told the committee, and it bears repeating, "It is sad to say that I would rather be at war in Afghanistan than work under people who are morally corrupt." Mr. Speaker, while some might prefer a harsher sentence, and perhaps even a few might think a reprimand is too severe, I urge my colleagues to support the unanimous recommendation of the only evenly divided committee in this House of Representatives. And with that, I yield back the balance of our time.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All those in favor of the resolution shall say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted, and without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Alabama.
I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H.Res. 755.
Without objection. The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has agreed to the House amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 1905, cited as the Iran Threat Reduction and Syria Human Rights Act of 2012.
Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess for a period less than 15 minutes.